Um, Namaskar and welcome everyone. We are excited to have the Masterclass series of Being Future Ready and Vadhvani Institute of Technology and Policy from Vadhvani Foundation, Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, and Karmyogi Bharat. We bring to you the Masterclass session for February. And before I, of course, introduce our guest and our topic for today's masterclass, allow me to quickly give you a brief introduction in case you are attending our masterclass for the first time. So just a moment. Just give me a second. Right. So clearly, we are quickly going to introduce our partners, and of course, we'll also invite our guest. There is a certain incentive also, apart from attending these masterclass sessions, there is an incentive for our audience as well, which I'll be sharing shortly. We are proud to be partnered with Indian Institute of Bangalore, with the CSITM, which is the Center of Excellence on Digital Technology Management. And this, of course, is a dedicated center where, of course, we have a global network and resources where we are serving a hub of open and open exchanges of information among academia, government, and industry. We also have Professor Shankadeep, who leads this for us from IIM Bangalore, and he will be joining us shortly as one of the panelists as he is able to join. Since he does have classes, he did mention that he will drop in. And of course, the focus of CSITM is on AI, digital transformation, product management, digital governance and policy. As we have CSITM, we are also looking at, of course, introducing ourselves within Vadhvani Foundation. Vadhvani Institute of Technology and Policy is, of course, a first of its kind organization, an institution which is actually working closely with our Honorable Prime Minister's vision on mainstreaming emerging technologies in government operations across India. And our objective, our vision and mission is enabling digital transformation that increases the impact and outcomes from government policies, initiatives, and programs. We do have three verticals within WITP where we focus our expertise through Skilling Academy, where we are looking at skilling and enhancing the awareness and taking our target audience of government officers, bureaucrats and policy makers to be able to implement emerging technology. We're also looking at enabling them through the vertical of our technology enabling team. And of course, advocacy for any programs and related to public policy is our third vertical. So without much further ado, I'd also like to share that we are going to be, rather, we have been hosting one such masterclass from the series called Being Future Ready every month. And this is the fourth one. And upon attending at least 50% of our masterclass, we are looking at awarding our audience a certificate from all our partners. So endorsed not only by IIM Bangalore, but also by Karmyogi Bharat and Vadhvani Foundation. So watch out for more such masterclass that we have lined up and as exciting as the ones that we've had so far and the one that we have for today with us. It gives me a lot of pleasure to also introduce our guest speaker for today. We are going to be talking to Shri Sharad Sharma, where he is going to be talking about the India Stack and open networks and why they matter. A quick round of introduction to, a quick round of introduction to Sharadji. He has been leading ecosystems and companies through orbit changes for almost 3 decades. He has co-founded iSPIRT Foundation, which is a not-for-profit technology think tank, and has conceptualized the India Stack, Health Stack, and other digital public goods. Sharadji also co-founded Teltier Technologies, a wireless infrastructure startup, which is now a part of Cisco. And he's an active angel investor with over 2 dozen investments. He was also instrumental in the success of India's first IP-focused fund, India Innovation Fund. Sharadji is a member of the National Startup Advisory Council and SEBI's Financial and Regulatory Technology Committee, an alumnus of Delhi College of Engineering. He previously held R&D leadership positions at Yahoo, Veritas, Symantec, Lucent, and AT&T. So I will not take too much time. I would like to hand over the stage to Sharadji. For all those of us who know me, my name is Purobhi Mitra. In case somebody who's meeting us for the first time, I'm a part of WITP. Very excited for this particular session. Welcome again, Sharadji. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So I'll dive in right away so that we can make most of your time today. Thank you all for joining. And so, many of you may be hearing this word, digital public infrastructure, often. It is part of our G20 conversations back in September, when India was kind of thinking about what should they focus on in G20 during its presidency of G20. Then digital public infrastructure was something that was picked up. In September, United Nations did its first UN General Assembly session on digital public infrastructure. And if you followed the budget, before, in the budget itself, there is a lot of mention about DPI. But one day before the budget, when the economic survey comes out, then the chief economic advisor mentioned in the economic survey, and therefore in the announcement of the economic survey, that it has the potential to add up till 100 basis points of growth year after year. So, and then of course, this is not just here, you also have many company executives. You may have seen clips about India Stack, the CEO of Microsoft talking about it. And Brad Smith, their vice chair, was in India some time back, and he had much to say about it as well. So what is digital public infrastructure? What's all this news about, right? It's actually two things. It is India Stack and open networks. And that is what we are going to talk about today. And my goal is to give you a little bit of a flavor of what this is. Why is this important? What will it mean for various stakeholders? What will it mean for policymakers, regulators? What will it mean for companies? What will it mean even for the whole society, the ecosystem? So that's what I'll cover as we go along. The simplest way to understand India Stack, which is on the left side of this, is that it is actually infrastructure, digital infrastructure, that mediates the flow of people, flow of money, flow of information in society. So what does mediating flow of people mean? It means that as you go through a system, people can figure out where you are, right? And so if you remember the vaccination time, Aadhaar played that role. And if you had taken an appointment, or you were waiting for the vaccination, or you were waiting for the booster shot, the system knew where you were in that stage, by referencing your Aadhaar number, right? And this is basically what a digital identity system does. And ideally, a digital identity system should be authenticable. And India is a leader in this with Aadhaar. And so Aadhaar is the world's largest identity system, which allows us to do that. Flow of money, I bet all of you are familiar with this, and that is UPI. And UPI is a public utility that basically mediates the flow of money. And I don't need to say much about it because I can be reasonably sure most of you are users of UPI. And UPI is big. Today, for example, we'll do more transactions in India than all the digital transactions in China. And if I go west from there, South Korea, all of Middle East, France, all of UK and US put together. So UPI is, of course, a big success story. and this is the only major payment system in the world that is set up as a public utility. The third, which is rolling out right now in the financial space, is actually called account aggregator. Some of you may have heard of it. It uses a protocol called DEPA. So what's the difference between DEPA and the account aggregator? The same difference between UPI and BHIM. So BHIM is the name of the network. All the people who use UPI are part of the BHIM system. We don't use it, although there's an app called the BHIM app, and therefore you'll see the BHIM logo in many places. But the protocol it uses is UPI. And similarly, the system, all the network of people who use the DEPA protocol in the financial world, they're called account aggregator, and that's regulated by all the financial regulators put together. And that system is relatively new. It was launched on September 2nd of 2022, September 2nd, 2021, and it's been growing very rapidly. It's still growing at 52% month on month. And eventually, because information can be shared multiple times, my piece of information that I have, I can share with all of you more than once, unlike money, which I can share only once. It is expected that maybe 10, 15 years from now, the number of transactions that we do on the DEPA system, Data Empowerment and Protection System, which mediates the flow of personal information, will exceed the number of payment transactions that we do in our society. So these three things, these three building blocks, or these three digital infrastructure, were conceived back in 2013, 2014, and they have over time come together, and they are called India Stack. Each one is important. So for example, if you just have Aadhaar, that enables us to do direct benefits transfer, and that is very important, as you know. But if you have two, it makes a bigger difference. And if you have three, some people call it, then you have magic that is possible. So what is this magic that is possible? The magic that is possible is that it leads to inclusion in a big way. It leads to reform of social services. And CoWIN was a very good example of that. You all received your certificate electronically. The payments on the back end to the private centers were made on time, usually on a daily basis. And of course, you navigated that system using your digital identity. So we were able to basically vaccinate 25 million people a week. And why is that significant? Because the vaccination centers that we used, which are about 40,000 vaccination centers, they would traditionally have vaccinated 25 million babies in a year. So this was roughly about 52x productivity. In fact, on some days even higher, because on 2 days we vaccinated 25 million people a day. So why is this important? Because when you have this streamlined flow of people, money, and information, it unlocks productivity. It unlocks enormous amount of productivity, even in government systems. And of course, it does that in private systems as well, which is why Jio onboards its customers using only eKYC. But it is important that it does that in a big way in government systems. So that becomes a very important benefit. The third is that it can change the nature and the quality of the market systems that we have. And in India, we have these experiments taking place right now, which are in 3 areas. These are all open networks: open network for credit, open network for health, and open network for digital commerce. And I'll come back and talk about them in a little while from now. So I just wanted to set the stage about what is DPI. DPI is India Stack and the effort around open networks. Now, why is it called infrastructure? Why is it important? Now, we know public infrastructure is very important. In fact, after World War II, many of you may be familiar that US went out to build the interstate system, the highway system in the US. And why did they do it as a public infrastructure? Because they felt that that would dramatically improve the success of their economy. Things will be easier to ship around, it'll lead to more innovation, towns will benefit, many good things happen from having public infrastructure. Now, public infrastructure, transportation one is not just roads, but it's ports, railways, and airports. And India is now doing pretty well in these areas, right? Now, this happens to be something which is of two types. One is that you have publicly provisioned public infrastructure. So the highway system in the US is publicly provisioned highway infrastructure, right? The US government provides that, the federal government provides that. In India, railways is usually publicly provisioned public infrastructure. But you can also have privately provisioned public infrastructure. In fact, some airports in India are now privately provisioned public infrastructure. Some airports are publicly provisioned public infrastructure. So when they're privately provisioned, there's a bunch of issues that you need to resolve, right? We'll come back to those in a little bit. One of them can be monopolization. And so India finally has figured this out for ourselves. We are doing a good catch up. We know how to make our transportation infrastructure work, right? It took us some time, but we got the hang of it. Then, as the telecom infrastructure has been very important. Fixed line was publicly provisioned public infrastructure. India didn't do very well there. But when it came to mobile telephony, India has done very, very well, right? And that is mostly privately provisioned public infrastructure. And there again, it took us some time to get our act together. But today, we are an example for the rest of the world, right? Especially on mobile data, and especially because all our mobile operators do well in that area. And of course, the precipitating reason for this was Geo. So this is how the things were, right? So what happened was, if you go back to early 2000s, what was happening was that a type of digital infrastructure, not public infrastructure, digital infrastructure had come about, and that is called the cloud infrastructure, AWS. And when AWS came, the many people in India felt that we could actually create business applications on AWS and make them available to everybody else. So these are software products that are available on the cloud, and they're called software as a service. And this year, for example, we will cross $20 billion in revenue from our SaaS companies. These are companies like Zoho, Freshworks, Kissflow, Darwinbox, many, many others, right? And so this is really, really thrived in a big way. And so let's say, and back in time, if I take you to 2013, when such an analysis was done for the first time, the cumulative revenues of the same segment was less than $100 million, right? So if you see, in 10 years, it's grown from less than 100 million to 20 billion. So it's an excellent, excellent performance as a country, and we should be really proud of this as we go forward. But all of this 20 billion revenue runs on somebody else's cloud infrastructure, right? And so while India will make some money from it, because these are companies, Indian startups that have done this, but equal or more amount of money will be made by the cloud infrastructure providers. So this idea took root, was that, hey, if all our digital infrastructure is going to be mostly foreign, then, would we not run the risk of becoming a colony again, right? And so that is how this notion took root, saying that maybe some of this infrastructure in a country like India should be treated like public infrastructure. So what has now happened is that these three types of foundational digital infrastructure is in India treated like a public infrastructure, of which, of course, using digital identity, having that publicly provisioned public infrastructure is not controversial at all. But back in the early days of UPI, if some of you are familiar, there was a lot of resistance from everywhere in the world that we were going to treat a payment system as public infrastructure. And furthermore, as privately provisioned public infrastructure, that was particularly galling for most people, because Visa, MasterCard, Alipay, WeChat Pay, all of these were private infrastructure. They're not public infrastructure. So India took a very big leap of faith in deciding this will be public infrastructure. And, it's a good thing that it then worked out, because that has then allowed us to do that, even with the mediation of flow of data. And that has in India also become the public infrastructure. Now, what is happening is India is the leader. So the best way to think of this is to think about 1992. In 1992, the whole world was making a beeline for Scandinavia. I used to work for AT&T Bell Labs at that time. Even I made a visit at that time. And why were people making that visit? Everybody was going to see the GSM system there, the mobile telephony system there. And by 95, over 50 countries had decided that they also want a mobile telephony system, right? Now, of course, they were not sure whether it should be GSM, CDMA, TDMA, how will they give a license? In Italy, it was given through a beauty contest. In UK, it was given as an auction. What type of an auction will it be if it's an auction? Many open questions were there. But, in principle, countries had decided that they want mobile telephony in their country, right? And even in India, by early 97, we had mobile telephony that had come in. So this is the same moment repeating itself. Now, 50 plus countries have decided that they also need this foundational digital public infrastructure. And the only country that has all the three working condition today, in a good working condition, working at very high scale, is India. So India has become what Scandinavia was back in 92. And so instead of now relying on somebody else, we are left to answer these questions as to how should you do it? What are the open questions that need to be answered? What will be the incentive system if you set up a public utility based payment system? How will the regulation happen? How will you prevent monopolization? How will you prevent the fact that you don't want these systems to become a tool of the state, so that the balance of power between the citizen and the state changes, right? Which has been the subject of 3 Supreme Court judgments about Aadhaar. So there's a lot of experience with respect to that in India. How will you make sure that you don't get colonized? How do you make sure that if you're using somebody else's system, they're not able to weaponize it? These are all answers that India has, and the world wants to know, right? So this is really what is taking place in some way in India, and that's the reason why you see so much of chatter about it as you go on. Now, of course, India continues to evolve things, and you will see more things happening. You will see, especially for a data infrastructure, one half is launched, which is to do with personal data. This year, the other half will be launched, which is to do with training data. It is still the same protocol called DEPA. You will see extra stuff come in on Vani. If you go to iSPIRT blog, pn.ispirt.in, you can read more about Vani. And there is more stuff coming about drones. We have a working system for drones, visual line of sight, but we don't have a working system for beyond visual line of sight. So that's going to come in as well. So in addition to all the experiments that are happening on the open network side. So the question is, what is an open network? Why is this so important? Why is it in the news? Open networks is a economic principle originally crystallized in 1958. And a version of this is called net neutrality. And India came into this principle, or had a conflict with Facebook in 2014, 2015, because the way this is set up in India is that if you are an ISP, you can charge the user, but you can't charge the content providers, right? So which is YouTube and Netflix or any other internet website that is there. So that is a careful design that has been done. It's called net neutrality. And that was challenged by Facebook back in time. And there was a big effort called Save the Internet campaign. Some of you may have even participated in it. In fact, that was the only time, and it hasn't been repeated since, when 2 million signatures have been submitted, verified signatures have been submitted, by Indian citizens on a particular policy. So at this time, it did occupy public mindshare. And India then crystallized its policy, formalized its policy on net neutrality. But we also learned in the process that net neutrality is part of open networks, and open networks itself would be very important to do. So what is this open network? Open network says that if you have an intermediary, that intermediary should be either an agent of the buyer or the agent of the seller. If it's an agent of both, it is an agent of neither. And if it's an agent of neither, then regulating it becomes very hard. And so therefore, in a society where regulatory capacity is weak, it is good to have intermediaries who either are agent of the buyers or agent of the sellers. And so what happened after this Facebook incident happened? Uh, there were many experiments that took place. One of them was in mutual funds. Mr. UK Sinha used to be the SEBI chairperson that time. And in mutual funds, you can either buy it from a distributor, who is, of course, an agent of the seller, or from a registered investment advisor, which is your agent, right? You can't have an intermediary who can be both. They can be one or the other. They cannot be both. And then system was set up to make sure it will be like that and it's properly regulated. And in the Indian mutual fund industry has benefited enormously from this clarity that has emerged. And now there's also applied, believe it or not, India is one of the few countries where it is true even for online travel agents. So when you buy a ticket from Make My Trip, Clear Trip, Yatra, any of these players, they are your agents. So you pay them a convenience fee. They don't get anything from the airline for that travel. So let's say a new airline comes in, which is Akasa Air. As long as they integrate with them, they don't have to pay them a fee. So when you look for a ticket, let's say from Mumbai to Ahmedabad, and they're required to show you all flight options, including Akasa Air or any new player that has come, and you get to pick. So why? Because they're your agent, they're not airline's agent, right? And so they charge you, they don't charge the airline. Now, the benefits of this approach. So after these successes with mutual fund and online agents, then this confidence emerged that we should apply this more boldly, and that is being applied for credit first, and then these other two examples that I talked to you about. And now there are many pilots going on. I won't go through this slide in detail because it's got too much of information in it, but there are many pilots going on. And I think we are about 18 months, 2 years, something like that away for many of these pilots to succeed. Now, all of them may not succeed, some may fail, but we'll learn a lot from that. So the larger objective here is that for the first time, any one country in the world is trying to build market systems in meaningful areas which don't have rogue intermediaries. And this has never been attempted at this scale in any other country in the world. And so this is an India experiment. Now, of course, I want you to be careful. This is not yet successful, but I'm cautiously optimistic that it will be. So if you come to cash flow lending, I'm going to run through the next few slides very quickly. The way this works out, these experiments, pilots work out, is that you do them, as a series of phases, right? So you test something out and then you scale it up as you go along. So the first test that took place was with GEM and this new type of lending. GEM, which is Government E-Marketplace, acted as a borrower's agent. There was an escrow agent. There were many lenders. So it's a three-party transaction. Three-party transaction is mediated by Open protocol so that they can all talk to each other very easily. So it uses that. And then when you come to GST Sahe, it becomes a four-party transaction because it has the account aggregator added in. And later in April, it'll have two more parties joining in, which are called disbursement agents, will become part of that, and credit guarantors will become part of that. So eventually you will end up having a 7-party kind of a model where everybody integrates with each other using open protocols, right? And so this is really what is happening here. When you receive this slide, there is an embedded portion in it. Let's see if it can. Yeah, there's a video here that you can play. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just tease this video and go back uh, uh, to my presentation. And so so let's see. So I'll let you see this video later in time when you get the actual presentation from the team here. So but what it does is, it gives a miraculous kind of an experience. So this year 2023 is going to be an age of a new type of lending to come to life in India. And this is not asset based lending, it's cash flow based lending. It's short tenor loans, small ticket loans that can be availed of very quickly and retired, and then you rotate them as you go forward. Later when you watch the video, you'll get a sense of that. And towards the end of the presentation, I have further reading, and there are pointers there to learn more about it as we go forward. So the GEM Sahib pilot has done very well. Account aggregator, which will be integrated in, is also doing very well, as I mentioned to you. So you can now see what is happening in open networks. It's basically bringing many things back. Now, if you are able to solve credit for small businesses, farmers, dairies, milk dairies, and the like, which is hopefully going to be the case, it will have an impact on society, right? And it will have an impact where this impact is happening in the hands of the credit ecosystem, which includes lenders, borrowers agents, collection agents, escrow agents, data providers, many of those players, right? So they're all coming together in a new way to actually be able to generate value in the economy. But that's not the only value add that happens. I want to point out to another type of value add that takes
Sharadji,
place, which is to
sorry
do.
to interrupt. Quick time check. We have another 20, 25
Sure.
minutes
Sounds
before
good.
you open questions.
Sure.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good. So, and that happens because what takes place is that this public infrastructure that we're talking about, you can use it with by combining it with private innovation to solve old problems that have not been solved before. An example is taxi hailing. Taxi hailing, the new type of taxi hailing of Uber, Ola, is possible only because GPS exists, and GPS is the public infrastructure there, right? And that is available to everybody to be able to use that. So this is the value that you get. So for example, for cash flow lending, this is a famous slide back from 2014 called the Rajini slide. The lady inside is a street vendor, real street vendor, although we don't use her real name. And so what she would do to obtain of an intraday loan in the formal system would be on the inside circle. What the market players would do would be the middle circle. And to help them do what they do, you have the outer circle. In fact, the joke is that everything in India stack has actually been built for Rajini. So back in time, if Rajini needed to be in a formal system, you couldn't have the bank or the lender afford to do a 50 rupee KYC for her, right? That would just not have been viable. So eKYC helped there, right? So then she needed a way to be able to sign the loan agreement. Remember, she's in the formal system. So e-sign came up. She needs a place to store that place. That's how DigiLocker came up. She needs to receive the 400 rupees and send them back in the evening, since it's an intraday loan. Back in time, you could only do it on a debit card, and that debit card would cost 1% on the way in, 1% on the way out. 2% a day is simply not affordable. So a public utility payment system had to be created for Rajni, and that is now called UPI. And if there are two Rajnis, right, one pays on time, one doesn't pay on time, the one who pays on time should get a cheaper loan. But she'll only get a cheaper loan if she threatens to take her business somewhere else. And taking her business somewhere else is all about taking her data and her history of data that is embedded in that data somewhere else, and therefore the account aggregator system. And then to ensure that she doesn't take two loans which she can't pay back from the same income that she has in the day, you need the public credit registry. And so that is the only one pending. But in this budget, the government has announced that there'll be the National Financial Inclusion Registry, which is a renaming of the Public Credit Registry that has now been announced. So it'll come. So what was conceived many years back, one by one, each one of them has come together, right? So now you can see the interaction between digital public infrastructure and practical use, in the Indian context. And the same thing is happening for health, same thing is happening with logistics, it's happening with commerce. I'm merely giving you one example. And what is dramatic about India is that it is not only the public infrastructure and the market participants that are talking to each other, the government is now shaping policy to bring all the three legs of this together. And that type of ecosystem building, playground building, is what is propelling India's revolution that you see today. And so this then results in many shifts that happen. One of the shift is that it goes from a seller's market. You remember old days when you had to stand in line and get a Chetak, to today where people compete to sell you a two-wheeler or any other thing that you want. This is what the lending market is also going through for small businesses, where they had to literally be subservient to the lender. But now, at least on the gem marketplace where the pilot has been successful, they are the kings, because they are the customers, and lenders compete to get their business. So this, of course, means that the world of the companies, marketplace, changes a lot, right? And they have to live in a different world altogether. And again, this is something which is a presentation by itself. So I'll only introduce it here. They need a new playbook to operate in this world. And they have to therefore compete more, and which means that they have to have many more digital products. Maruti will not have 40-50% market share if it had only 2 car models. They need a car model for every price point, right? So now you need many more products, because this is a buyer's market, not a seller's market. So sellers have to differentiate themselves by having appropriate products. If they want to have many products, they have to build internal platforms to be able to make those products, right? If Maruti didn't have internal car platforms, they won't be able to have so many car options available, right? So it's very important for them to do that. They have to specialize in a few areas rather than do everything themselves, because different players can come together and become partners very easily, because we are all in this API world, right? And there are the standard APIs, standard protocols that allow people to connect with each other. So you need high NPS. NPS stands for Net Promoter Score, because it's a competitive market. They have to be early movers, and if they're not early movers, they'll get left behind. And so therefore much experimentation is needed. So it changes the way the companies are organized very significantly. And this is a revolution that is taking place in many sectors, quietly behind. There's not covered in the press that much, but that is what is happening in a very big way. It also changes things for the regulator, because if you think of it the India stack way, is that, look, I will have 3 lanes for everybody. There'll be one lane where there is this public infrastructure that is available. Then there'll be some regulated players, and then there'll be some unregulated players, right? So for example, in UPI, you have PhonePe, Google Pay, Bheem. They are unregulated players. Why? Because they merely collect the consent, non-repudiable, digitally signed consent, and pass it on to your bank. The money flow still remains with the bank. So because the UPI protocol unbundles the consent flow from the money flow, the consent flow need not be regulated the way the money flow is regulated. So it creates a new type of a fintech ecosystem, where there is a need for a jugalbandi between regulated and unregulated players. And so this is a new way of doing things. This is very different from the Silicon Valley way, where in the crypto world, they're competing with what you see on the left-hand side, which are the banks. The banks are fully regulated. Crypto used to be, till all these problems came in, fully unregulated. And thankfully, starting 2014, India took this other approach, the India stack approach, which has now become the mainstream, or is, everybody looks at this as the gold standard for the world. So the Indian financial regulators are very, very good in understanding this, and they've done a phenomenal job of implementing this model as they go forward, right? And so it requires a new template. This template requires techno-legal regulation, because you can use the public tech that is there not only to foster innovation in market players, but you can also use it to regulate better. So UPI is not only good for Phone Pay and Google Pay and Bheem and Bharat Pay and all these players to innovate better, but it's also good for RBI to regulate better, right? So this is how public infrastructure is designed, that it serves two masters, both the regulator and the innovator, in a way that is actually helpful. So it reframes the discussion from regulation. If you do good regulation, it'll be at the cost of innovation. No, in the India model, you get regulation and innovation. You, because of the DEPA protocol, you get privacy and personalization. So it's not that to maintain privacy you have to compromise on personalization. You get both. Because of our identity system, we get both ease of use. eKYC is way safer than paper KYC, and it is a lot more convenient to use, right? So you get ease of use and fraud protection. Otherwise, the traditional model was to prevent fraud. You'll have many process steps. If you have many process steps, then it's no longer easy to use, right? So this kind of thinking just kind of reimagines the kind of regulation that is possible. It also is now resulted in this happy problem that we have, which is where we now have to not only think about India, but think about the world, right? So because of our identity success, back in time, what happened was that we started as a country thinking, hey, can we build an identity system that the rest of the world will use, right? And these things are not easy to build. It takes long-term commitment. You got to get policy. Policy happens in Delhi. You need to get public technology, which usually happens in Bangalore. You need the market players. They're usually Bombay-based, so you need to get all of them together. You need many types of players that need to come together. So to do all that, the thinking was, can we make this work for somebody else outside India? And why do it separately? And that effort is called MOSIP. It is parked in IIIT Bangalore, is because countries don't like to take public technology from the government. So Indian EVM machines are very good, and Bangladesh came this close to using them, right? It would have been good for everybody, in fact, to use them because our system is very robust. And then they backed off because they said, if you're in the good books of India, the system will work fine. But if you're not in the good books, then that system India may weaponize it, may control our elections. We don't know. They say they won't do it, but we can't trust them, right? And so why is that happening? Because the Western world has weaponized all their public tech that is there. So India is not able to escape that. So you can create, therefore, trustworthy systems if there are outside the government, but they are fiercely Indian. And MOSIP is an example of that. MOSIP today, you can go to this place called mosip.io. You can follow this dashboard. They currently 80 million people are using it, 9 countries. So every Sri Lankan, every Filipino, every Moroccan, and so on and so forth. When they get their national identity, it is actually on the Indian system. So now what is happening is that this G20 effort, and remember I told you everybody is arriving in India, 50 countries want to replicate it. They want to come to India and figure it out. And this is a golden opportunity for India to provide thought leadership, to provide public goods to even other countries, because this will then allow us to exert soft power. India up till now has never, in the recent past, back in time, historically we did it, but in recent past, we have always been recipients, receivers, consumers of this stuff, never been people who can actually ship it to the world. So, but this requires a playbook to change. And this requires us to think about normative values, because what's right for India may not be right for Kenya. So we have to think about that. So in the health stack, we've started vocalizing our values, right? So if people want to see whether these values are right, because these values are embedded in our technology, public technology, so they can assess for themselves whether that's right or not. There's a link here. You can go to that link later. For health stack, we verbalized our normative principles. We build this toward organizations. MOSIP, for example, is triple IT Bangalore, as I said. People want to have them as standards for the first time. We have an opportunity and most likely the ability to create India-driven global standards in identity, in payments, and in data sharing. And then, of course, we have to arrange for funding. For example, the Sri Lankan identity effort, the national identity effort, is funded by India. So all that has to also come together. So in summary, this is what I have talked to you about. That we have a third wave of public infrastructure that is going to happen in the world, or this is a wave that's going to travel to every part of the world. And this third wave of public infrastructure, India is the leader of that. And it will help many countries solve the inclusion problem, reform of government services problem, and also open innovation. Second, we said why people like the India model, because it is in many cases, in the case of UPI and the case of DEPA, it is privately provisioned public infrastructure. And that is the norm today, right? If all our airports were government owned, we won't have the system that we want. Even the Indian government has realized that ports, airports, even roads, and some railway trains itself have to be private. So you want to retain this idea of public infrastructure, but have it privately provisioned. So the India model is able to offer that, because there are risks in doing this. When you do this, monopolization can happen. When you do public infrastructure, then authoritarianism can happen, weaponization can happen. India's figured all this out, right? And so this knowledge is very attractive to others, right? And and then, of course, since this has become a reality in India, it has impact on market players. They have to do things differently. It has an impact on the ecosystems. You will see new types of ecosystems coming in, and it has an impact on policymakers and regulators, because they have to create different types of policies and they have to regulate in a new way. And G20 is acting as a forcing function to organize all this tacit knowledge that we have, and in a way so that it benefits us, but it also benefits the rest of the world. So, of course, there are many, many things to read here. This is just a short list of things. There's a nice article on India Stack. I mentioned data empowerment and protection architecture, DEPA, many times. OCEN, I talked about it. There are some important papers from Bank of International Settlements about digital financial infrastructure. You can read that, because that gives you a global point of view. There are policy discussions that are happening, particularly this how public policy and public technology come together is a podcast that is almost gone viral, so it's worth listening to that. And so on and so forth. So you'll see other countries, for example, Henri Verdier here talking about from a French perspective. He's the chief. He's the tech envoy of France, and he will explain why the India model is so relevant even for the West. So this is my very last slide. Who am I? iSPIRT is a non-profit tech think tank. It's a volunteer-based think tank, no greed, no glory. And much of what public technology that I talked about today has come from iSPIRT volunteers and then given away. So we don't keep anything to ourselves, we give it away. And so if you go to our website, for example, occasionally in our 10 years of existence, we call out our volunteers as heroes because they've done exceptional stuff. On February 4th or February 5th, a few days back only, we called out our fourth volunteer hero, and his name is Amit Ranjan. Why? Because he was instrumental in DigiLocker coming to life. And NEGD, which is the partner here, is the partner for DigiLocker as well. And while the initial system came up, and the NEGD team has done absolute wonders in kind of growing this and taking it and making it one of the most meaningful digital infrastructures in the world. So this is really what happens. It requires people to take a long view of things, and that's really what is happening. So I'm not here to talk about iSPIRT. So with that, I'm going to move on and say thanks, and if there is time, take a few questions.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you, Sharad ji. That was refreshingly insightful. While people are, gathering their thoughts for the questions during the talk, we had one person who had posed a question. Shri Vyas HM asks, can you name the applications developed by the Government of India or any states using the DEPA framework?
Sure. So the best one to cite here is called eSarthi. This is by Karnataka government, and it is to take all your data that is there, particularly in the agriculture space, and you can then, this is already with the government, right? So can you now ask the Karnataka government to give it to somebody else? So that's why it's called e-Sahamati, not e-Sarthi, sorry. It's called e-Sahamati. So you are giving consent using the DEPA framework for your data, which is already with the government, to be shared with somebody else. Now, of course, account aggregator itself is been integrated with all the public sector banks. We have 1.14 billion bank accounts connected to that, and 60% of them are from public sector banks. So that's an area where, again, this is significant. We don't often appreciate that account aggregator, although it is a new system, and as I said, launched only on September of 2021, it is already bigger than GDPR system that was launched in Europe. And there are serious discussions in Europe to make the India system, the Indian DEPA system, the GDPR 2.0 for Europe. So very often we don't appreciate what's in front of us, until it kind of really goes mainstream, right? So DEPA has good usage in both private sector and the government sector.
Thank you. Yes, Shri Vyas has also responded. So while, we have another 30 minutes for questions, and while the audience is, getting their thoughts together, I urge everyone to please use the chat to pose your questions. Meanwhile, Sharadji, are there any popular questions or queries in such a topic that when you deliver, especially related to open networks and India Stack, that you can cite while the audience is thinking?
So one concern that people often have is that, okay, you're making an argument, this will lead to more innovation, but isn't this a type of socialism, right? Where, where public goods are eating into what would have been private infrastructure, really. And I think there is legitimacy to that question. So therefore, it's very important to have a minimalist perspective, because you want only minimal digital infrastructure to be classified as public infrastructure. And because if you start classifying all infrastructure as public infrastructure, then it will become a problem over time. So that is one. Second, even when you classify it as public infrastructure, it is good to explore, as India has done, to see if it can be privately provisioned. So those are both important requirements. These are hard to do because when you have success, there's a tendency to say, let's let's make everything public infrastructure, or let's make everything publicly provisioned public infrastructure. And both of these tendencies we have to avoid.
Okay. We do have another question from Srivyas HM, where they're asking, can you please talk about the status of implementing data monetization in Indian government context?
I'll mention this in both contexts. So first is, there are two cycles that are there, and I'll flash a slide so that I can explain this a little better. Uh, so there are two cycles of data that are there that we have to understand. One is called the inference cycle, and the other one is called the training cycle. Now, what does the inference cycle mean? Inference cycle means that, look, like money, we don't keep it under our carpet. Our personal data is also not sitting with us most of the time, right? Our photos are sitting with Google and Apple. Our financial data is sitting with banks, mutual funds, insurances. My health data is sitting with the lab. Often it's sitting with the doctor, hospital, and all of that. So if supposing, let's take the lending example, I want to apply for a loan, and if I can give the lender a near 360-degree view of my financial life, my odds of getting a loan become better. So in the India system, what you can do is to do it on consent. I can give consent. And so my three data from my 3 bank accounts, 2 mutual fund accounts, 1 insurance can be sent to the lender, and the lender gets a more complete picture. Now, what the lender gets is a silver copy of my data. So which means it's purpose limited, which means they can only use it to infer whether or not I am eligible for a loan, I should get a loan, what will be my risk. And after they have done that, they have to retire that data. They have to destroy that data. And so if supposing 6 weeks later, I go back and want to apply again, I'll have to go through the same process again. So this is called the inference cycle. And in this inference cycle, my personal data cannot move from my custodians to the personal data consumer without my electronic consent. And that consent is auditable, it is notified. It's like, just like when I send money on UPI, I get a SMS saying, 20 rupees was sent somewhere. So I get a notification when the money, here you get a notification that your data was actually sent, and all those goodies are there. And that's what makes this system so compelling. Now, this is one type of data transfer, right? And as I pointed out, even Government of India is into this and are saying that, look, I will make this possible. Remember, there is no monetization here. This is my data. I am asking my bank to send it to my lender, right? And why am I doing this? Because I want to be able to get a loan, right? So this is not about monetization. Now, where monetization usually comes in is that my lender, or same thing I can do, by the way, for a doctor, I want a second opinion. I send all my reports from 5-7 different places, and now doctor gets a 360-degree view to infer what's wrong with me. But as doctor sees many more patients, they have silver copies of many patients that are there. Now they are tempted to now monetize this, right? They're saying they can now ask a diagnostic bot company. Let's say I have high myopia, so I'm going to a eye doctor who takes my retina scan. Now, they have many retina scans. So many companies coming in and saying, if you let me see that, bunch of retina scans that you have, I can train my model to identify problems very easily. And that is where training data sets are monetized. Now, in India, what is happening is that this is the new system that is coming. Now, when that training data set is sent to somebody else, to a modeler, it is very risky, because to prevent leak of privacy, you anonymize that data set. But anonymization is an art, it's not a science. If you over anonymize, the signal is lost. If you under anonymize, de-anonymization is possible. So therefore, anonymization results in many problems that we have heard about everywhere in the world. India is abandoning the anonymization model and replacing it with a different model, where instead of that data going somewhere else, the model comes and visits the data. But that model can come and visit the data only if the certification has been done. And if that certification happens using differential privacy, it's a public certification system. What it gives you is a computational guarantee that this model can take model weights back. After it inspects the data, it can take model weights back, but it cannot take any private data back, right? And so now suddenly it creates a system in India where you can unlock training data sets for modeling purposes even monetization purposes, but in a way that is computationally guaranteed to be privacy preserving. Now, if you can do that, then India, since it has lots of data, India has a chance of emerging as a model capital of the world. And it moves away from the old model that I am, let's say, an IRCTC, and I want to monetize my data. In the act of monetizing that data, I actually compromise privacy. In this model, it is not possible to compromise privacy. And furthermore, it is possible that IRCTC or whoever is the training data provider who's making money in this monetization process will share that monetization with the data principals, right? With the individuals whose data it was in the first place. And since it's all electronic, it is possible for that data individual to say, I choose to opt out from this system. So when, I book a ticket, I don't want my data should be put in the aggregate data set so that it will be used for monetization later. Both of those possibilities automatically become available. So this is the new system that is going to go out as we speak. The inference cycle is already up and running. It is quite on its way to become a grand success, and the training cycle will come out later this year. And then that will complete the system that we have in India, and India would have the most modern, most citizen-friendly data sharing system, both for personal data and for training data of any country in the world. It will be the most robust and successful system in the world.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that question. We have another question, Sharadji, by Pankaj Srivastav. He asks, are our regulatory institutions geared well to formulate forward-looking policies and educate on disputes? Educate.
So it's a very good question. I think in the financial world, the answer to that is yes. The financial regulators are very clued in, and they operate in this model that I talked to you about. But when it comes to other sectors, we have to supplement our regulatory capacity and state capacity to make that happen. In fact, for this new world that is emerging, there are market capacity gaps and there are state capacity gaps, both of which have to be sorted out. But, it is going to happen. Why? Because we have a successful example before us, which is the financial world. And in the financial world, it has worked very well. And therefore, it gives us a reference implementation that we can use in other areas as well.
Great. So a quick roundup with the audience. Do we have any other questions for Sharadji? I guess, Sharadji, that's about it for now. Yeah. But one thing we got a lot as queries is that people would definitely like to see the deck as a reckoner and point of reference. So we'll send it to them. Anything that we would like to share before we perhaps close the masterclass, or anything that you'd like to conclude or summarize?
No, I think thank you so much for inviting me. Happy to be here, and so look forward to more discussion on this as we
go. Great. I urge the audience, even if at this point, if we don't, cite a question, please feel free to write the questions to us as we send you the decks. We'll be more than happy to share these questions with Sharadji. If required, create a Google Sheet perhaps so that you all can enter your questions and Sharadji can perhaps answer them at his convenience. That should be visible to all of us. So I guess, should we wrap the masterclass session at this point? Perfect. So as closing notes, we'd like to thank profusely our speaker for this session, Sharad Sharma, clearly giving us a lot of insight. one such, area that people are inquisitive about. And I'm sure we want to know more and understand more when it comes to India stacks and open networks, and why they are important, and what is the role that they are playing, and how can we look at, of course, learning more about it. So thank you once again, Sharaji, for being a part of the Future Ready series. It's exciting, and we look forward to reaching out to you for further queries or questions. And to the audience, thank you very much for joining us this month as well. Stay tuned. We have quite a few masterclass sessions lined up, just like we had one today. We will send out to all our invitees and all our attendees the deck, as well as the recording link, which will be on Pardhani Foundation YouTube channel. So in case you wish to re-look at the video, please do so. And thank you again, also to the NEGD as well as Karmyogi Bharat team, IIM Bangalore, and all those of us who attended. Thank you so much for coming, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.